guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
In the report called Strengthening America's Defenses, which was produced by a think tank called Project for the New American Century, it was published by the Bush team before he became president in September 2000, almost exactly 1 year before 9/11.
In the document Rebuilding America's Defenses, the PNAC recognised that the American people would not accept simple adventurism in the Middle East, i.e. invading other countries without reason.
And what is highly significant is that in the course of these documents, which make chilling reading because they're actually about American dominance, full spectrum dominance of every aspect of space, of the internet, of use of biological weapons, of preventing any country challenging American hegemony, of putting more troops into Asia as a counter to China. It is very chilling reading. In the course of this, it says this will be a very long struggle to achieve these objectives, absent, which is the American word for unless, there is a catastrophic and catalyzing event like Pearl Harbor.
Listen, Bin Laden didn't blow up the projects. It was you, nigga. Tell the truth, nigga.
Bush knocked down the towers.
Tell the truth, nigga.
Bush knocked down the towers.
Tell the truth, nigga. Bin Laden didn't blow up the projects. It was you, nigga. Tell the truth, nigga.
Bush knocked down the towers.
Tell the truth, nigga.
Bush knocked down the towers.
Mortal technique. Pledge no allegiance, nigga. Fuck the president's speeches. I'm baptized by America and covered in leeches. The dirty water that bleaches your soul and your facial features, drowning you with propaganda that they spit through the speakers. And if you speak about the evil that the government does, the Patriot Act to track you to the type of your blood. They try to frame you and say you was trying to sell drugs and throw a federal indictment on niggas to show you love. This shit is run by fake Christians, fake politicians. Look at their mansions and look at the conditions you live in. All they talk about is terrorism on television. They tell you to listen, but they don't really tell you their mission. They funded Al-Qaeda and now they blame the Muslim religion. Even though Bin Laden was a CIA tactician, they gave him billions of dollars and they funded his purpose. Fahrenheit 9/11, that's just scratching the surface.
Come on, come on. Bin Laden didn't blow up the projects. It was you, nigga. Tell the truth, nigga.
Bush knocked down the towers.
Tell the truth, nigga.
Bush knocked down the towers.
Tell the truth, nigga. Bin Laden didn't blow up the projects. It was you, nigga.
Yeah, I've said that 9/11 was in fact a full-scale coup d'etat that went wrong, and I mean I have no doubt about why they wanted to do it. They wanted to get into Afghanistan and Iraq as quickly as possible. This were the plans already announced by the Project for the New American Century.
I'm a war president. I make decisions here in the Oval Office in foreign policy matters with war on my mind.
Now, of course, if 9/11 had been investigated objectively, that document of PNAC will be seen as evidence in a prosecution against them. An intention to do something before it happens, then it happens, will be seen as evidence in court. So let's not dispute that. These people are in the frame for this, basically.
And the suggestion, which is made by the neoconservatives in that document that they wrote, suggests that they were thinking about a new Pearl Harbor to enable them to carry out political objectives. Obviously the attack on Iraq, which otherwise they couldn't do. I cannot prove, no one can prove that that was their objective, but the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming.
Some people actually believe that the kind of American government let it happen on purpose. This is known as other people actually believe that the American government made it happen on purpose, which is known as MIHOP. Now, obviously the difference between these two positions really is one of culpability. It's whether they actively encouraged the attacks rather than they just kind of simply turned a blind eye to them. turning a blind eye would be LIHOP, actively encouraging the attacks would be MIHOP. But I point out to people with my experience in counter-terrorism that LIHOP is actually a nonsense position. Even if you have intelligence saying people are going to crash planes into buildings, you have no guarantee on the day they're going to do that. So you can't let them get up there and hijack planes, because they might bring them down on the nuclear reactor outside New York, rather than the World Trade Centers. So the LIHOP position is in fact a nonsense. You've either got to accept the official story as it is, or you've got to come to the position that in fact they made it happen, that they allowed people like Mohammed Atta to pass in and out of the US even though he had a long terrorist record, that they actually actively stopped the FBI from investigating Al-Qaeda targets in the run-up to 9/11.
America has got a very, very unaccountable military and a very unaccountable secret intelligence, and it's got a long tradition of creating fake terror attacks to justify war. Whenever America goes to war, there's always some fake or confected event that justifies it, such as Pearl Harbor, when they knew perfectly well that attack was coming and just let it happen. I think that this is the grandest of those events, synthetic terror events, that has been constructed within the US military.
Well, it is a very interesting poll by the Zogby polling organisation, which suggests that half of New Yorkers now believe that the government knew. I don't think half the population of New York would take that view unless they felt there was pretty good evidence for it. And as I say, the amount of evidence that they had is unquestionably very considerable. Never been fully admitted. We do know, for example, that Condoleezza Rice, who was head of national security at that time, advised the president in the PDB, the President Daily Brief, on the 6th of August 2001, just 1 month before, that there was a risk and some foreknowledge that there could well be an attack on buildings in the United States, including by an aeroplane.
I believe the title was Bin Laden Determined to Attack Inside the United States.
Richard Clark, who was the head of counterterrorism in the White House, said a month before, gentlemen, in a conference of all the top brass in the White House, something spectacular is going to happen here, and it is going to happen very soon. So it's not just half the population of New York, it is those in the inner circle in the American government who had a pretty clear idea that something of a drastic kind was being planned. And yet, virtually no effort was made by the American government to arrest all of those who might have been involved or to follow up clues. The 20th hijacker, Zacarias Moussaoui, who's this French Islamic activist who's just been convicted in the US. He was found by 2 FBI agents. They requested permission to check his computer, where we now know that there was some evidence which related to 9/11, but it was refused from the highest level. And one does have to ask the question, why?
Howard Dean recently seemed to muse aloud whether you had advanced knowledge of 9/11. Do you agree or disagree with the RNC that this kind of rhetoric borders on political hate speech?
Yeah, look, there's time for politics, and you know, it's time for politics, and it's an absurd insinuation.
The remarkable fact is that NORAD and the American Air Force units that should have been protecting Washington did not turn a wheel to do anything until it was too late. The
first hit was at about 8:46 a.m. and the second about 9:05, and the third on the Pentagon was about 9:38. So there's a period of about an hour 40 minutes, and it is absolutely incredible that in that time no aircraft, military fighter aircraft, were put into the air, even though the hijacking was confirmed by at least 8:20 at the very latest, and even though there was a flight of F-16s with a top speed of 1,500 miles an hour at the Crawford Air Base, St. Andrews Air Base, only 10 miles from Washington. That has never been explained. And thirdly, there's the issue of what happened afterwards, because there were many occasions in which clearly the Americans could have caught Osama bin Laden. The Pakistani authorities were quite prepared to hand him over. He was certainly within the sights of soldiers or aircraft on more than one occasion, in their crosshairs as they refer to it, and the orders never came through to capture him.
America needs an external bogeyman to hate and fear, and bin Laden fulfilled that role. I mean, the real character bin Laden, very fascinating, equivocal character, cannot really be discussed at all in the American media. Actually, he was in terminal decline from kidney failure. He was in a Dubai hospital June the 4th that year, American hospital being looked after. Then on September the 10th, he's in Rawalpindi in Pakistan, again having a kidney operation to try and rescue him. And American intelligence knew he was in a terminal condition.
Richard Myers, the US Chief of Staff, himself said not long after 9/11, when he was asked about this, that if by some chance we were to capture bin Laden, then that would render useless the wider preparations which were being made for more general purposes. Now, of course, those were approximately his words. We don't exactly know what he meant, but I think now we know that it was, of course, the preparations to hit Afghanistan, and in particular to go for Iraq, which on the day it happened, Rumsfeld was immediately keen that the CIA should come forward with evidence to suggest that Saddam Hussein and the Iraqis had been behind the 9/11 attacks.
You come in September 12th, ready to plot what response we take to Al-Qaeda. Let me talk about the response that you got from top administration officials. On that day, what did the president say to you?
The president, in a very intimidating way, left us, me and my staff, with the clear indication that he wanted us to come back with the word that there was an Iraqi hand behind 9/11, because they had been planning to do something about Iraq from before the time they came into office.
Did he ask about any other nations other than Iraq?
No, not at all. It was Iraq, Saddam, find out, get back to me.
And were his questions more about Iraq than about Al-Qaeda?
Absolutely, absolutely. He didn't ask me about Al-Qaeda.
And the reaction you got that day from the Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld, from his assistant, Paul Wolfowitz?
Well, Donald Rumsfeld said, when we talked about bombing the Al-Qaeda infrastructure in Afghanistan, he said there were no good targets in Afghanistan. Let's bomb Iraq. And we said that Iraq had nothing to do with this. And that didn't seem to make much difference.
And I think that is highly significant. That is what the purpose really was.
There have been various reports that Osama bin Laden, in fact, was a CIA agent, and that he was visited by the CIA in hospital shortly before 9/11. His name in his relationship with the CIA was Tim Osman, basically. But we know, of course, in the past, in the 1980s, it is a matter of public record that the Americans and the British supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, of which bin Laden was a part, in their fight against the Soviet Union. So there's no dispute about that at all, in the same way that they supported Saddam in the war against Iran. So it's never been in the interest of the CIA to actually capture bin Laden, because that might send a message saying this is the end of the war on terror.
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country. I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act.
Well, the Kean Commission was, of course, set up by President Bush himself. Let's remember that the first chairman was to be Henry Kissinger, who has been widely regarded by many as the Prince of Darkness, heavily involved in American activities in Vietnam and Indochina, and a Machiavellian master of diplomacy. one might think that the choice of Kissinger was in order to have the best chance to exonerate the administration from any unfortunate consequences. He was forced out almost immediately and replaced by Thomas Kean.
The Kean Commission was certainly not an independent and impartial commission. The chief executive of the commission, the guy who was directing the investigations, was Philip Zelikow, someone who's very close to the Republican administration. In fact, has written a book with Condoleezza Rice. So he was able to choose what was investigated and what wasn't.
When one comes to look at this report, it's very long. It's about 500 pages. Only the first 40 pages, chapter 1, is actually about what actually happened on the day. The rest is an enormous amount of administrative exegesis of every aspect of planning in the event of such an event like this again. Virtually nothing goes into the key details. How much did the administration know before? Why didn't they put up fighter aircraft into the air? And if they had, immediately within minutes at 8:20, it's quite possible that every single one of those 4 planes could have been knocked out of the air.
Will you testify before the commission?
This commission? You know, I don't testify. I mean, I'd be glad to visit with them.
The president's position was a break from history. Independent investigations were launched within days of Pearl Harbor and President Kennedy's assassination.
It's important for us to not reveal how we collect information. That's what the enemy wants. And we're fighting an enemy.
And if you take one single bit of evidence, which is incredibly significant, not even mentioned by the Kean Commission, it was the fact, as was revealed, never been denied by the FBI, that Mohammed Atta, who was the lead hijacker, everyone seems to believe that, received $100,000 mailed to him by an associate working for the head of the Pakistani ISI, military intelligence. Now, since that fact has not been denied, that is an extraordinarily revealing item. Was it mentioned? No, it wasn't. How can you seriously explore what lay behind it unless you look at the financing of it, and where you have a bit of evidence like this which is so revealing, not to go to the limits in finding out exactly what were the circumstances, who gave those instructions and why? Was there any connection between Pakistan and the US, or between the ISI and the CIA? And if there was, what does that tell you about the motivations behind the plot? I mean, these are incredibly important questions. I'm not able to give answers to them, but they are clearly questions which should be raised and an attempt be made by the official committee to answer them. It did nothing of the kind.
Most crucially, the Kean Commission fails to understand that Building 7 came down that day. Now, if you read the report, you'd have the impression, like most of the public do of course, that Building 7 did not come down that day. But that of course is something again which undermines the official story, because this is a 47-storey steel frame building which collapses under fire without being hit by an aeroplane. So again, the fact they don't deal with that would rather suggest that they can't deal with it, and therefore the Commission chose to ignore it, basically.
The staggering omissions in that report omitted most of the centrally important information, starting off with the fact that Building 7 collapsed that day in an identical manner to the other 2 buildings. It collapsed exactly into its own footprint, descending at free fall, the skyscraper 40 stories high, and it fell into a pile of dust in exactly the way that the other 2 buildings did, without any aeroplane striking.
Now, buildings don't just fall down, they have to have a reason for falling down. And the reason many people suspect that World Trade Center 7 fell down is that there were bombs in it, and indeed when you look at the collapse of it, it looks almost indistinguishable from what you would expect if there had been a controlled demolition.
It's amazing. Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the 3rd time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Skeptics were even more exercised when Larry Silverstein, the owner of World Trade Center 7, announced on public radio that he'd actually given the order, and I quote here, to pull it. Later, Silverstein claimed that he was saying that the firemen should be pulled out of the building because it was imminently going to collapse. However, there were no firemen in the building at the time that Silverstein made this statement, and there hadn't been for several hours. They'd already pulled the firemen hours before, and yet Silverstein said, I gave the order to pull it, and it just fell down.
They were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Now, many people might say, well, so what if there was a controlled demolition? Maybe the building was badly damaged, and it was damaged. There were small fires in the building. Why not just pull it down? Why not pull it, as Silverstein said? Well, the problem with that is you cannot organise a controlled demolition in a matter of 2 or 3 hours, whether or not there's just been a massive catastrophe a few hundred yards away. You have to have several days, if not several weeks, notice before you can rig a building with the sort of explosives and for the sort of controlled demolition which appears to have happened in the case of World Trade Center 7. So in other words, somebody knew that World Trade Center 7 was a target for demolition weeks before the 9/11 attacks occurred.
The official story basically says that there's something called the pancake effect, and that in fact what happened was that the steel joists weakened in the jet airline fuel, and as a result of that weakening eventually bowed out and made the floors collapse on top of each other. Now, you've only got to look at the footage yourself to clearly see that is not the case. The rate of collapse of those buildings is about 10 floors per second. That is not the pancake effect. And of course, if there was a pancake effect, there would be a slowing down because there would be resistance offered by the floors that were already in place. The official story, of course, makes no attempt to deal with these issues. It also makes no attempt to deal with the issue of the central columns, of course, because there's no reason why the central columns would fall in this theory. In fact, what you should have had was about 80 stories of columns left in place when the rest of it had collapsed. We didn't see that on the day.
From the emergency services that this was about to happen? Did anybody try to clear the streets, or did it just happen suddenly?
Well, I think what happened was that obviously they're talking about another explosion in Tower 2. So as all the emergency services were there, this second explosion happened, which then caused the collapse of Tower 2.
Do you know whether or not, and I'm sure it must be pretty hard to judge, but do you know whether or not that explosion happened as a result of damage, or did that explosion happen as a result of a device in the building?
They're saying it's a device in the building. It was too high up for it to cause the collapse. There must have been something down in the basement which caused it to collapse like that. It's a moment of disbelief, and there still are. I'm on the 12th floor looking straight at what used to be the Twin Towers. There's only one. The second one is going down now. As I speak live, the second one is now collapsed down to the ground. That's both of them gone, and there's just powers of smoke everywhere. That must have been an explosion as well.
Right, Nick, so the second tower, we're seeing these pictures now live here on ITV. The second tower has just collapsed. And again, tell us what you can see around you. I can just see enormous smoke, enormous chaos everywhere. It's just unreal. There were the Twin Towers, which were the feature of New York, and now they're not there.
The simplest thing you could tell anyone about 9/11 is that no steel building before or after 9/11 has ever collapsed from fire, period. There's various buildings, skyscrapers, that are raged for hours or days with fire, and at the end of that you see the steel structure standing when the fire goes out. Okay? It has never happened that the whole thing has come down suddenly, falling at the rate of free fall in 7 or 10 seconds. And that is precisely what 3 buildings did on September 11th. 3, not 2.
Some people say, well, how did they get all these explosive charges in the World Trade Center to bring it down? And again, the evidence is there if you look for it. People have said that the World Trade Center was shut down for long periods, CCTV, security cameras were closed off, and the company that was doing the World Trade Center security, again, was connected to George Bush's brother Marvin.